really, really delightful to be here. I always like to begin with just a moment of gratitude for IJS and for all the myriad of wonderful programming that IJS offers, but especially for this space that has been a refuge for many of us for a long time, and also to welcome, as Rabbi Miriam said, to welcome those of you who are newer to this space. Thank you. Thank you so much. Just take a moment to do a little bit of separation from whatever it was that you were doing before you entered this moment, in whatever way that might work for you. Perhaps resettling your body, moving items around in your physical space to just recognize that we're entering into a different space than we've been occupying previously. Today, I'm going to begin and end our practice with a nigun. And this is called Nigun Esh. It was taught to me by Rabbi Nehemiah Polin, and it's written by A.B. Rotenberg. We're heading into the Shabbat of Parshat Mishpatim, and so I wanted to share a teaching that comes to us from Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Shapira, known also as the Pietzesner. No relation as far as I know, but it would be a wonderful inheritance if it were so. The Pietzesner lived from this piece that I'm going to share with you was written approximately between 1930 and 1940, so it's somewhat contemporary. He quotes Rav Aharon Hagadol of Stolin, who's talking about this one line in Mishpatim. And the line is, Im ane ta'ane oto, ki im tza'ok yitz'ak elai, shamoa eshma tza'akato. If you do mistreat him, for if he cries out to me, I will heed his outcry. So it's this idea of God responding to us humans when we cry out. But what the Pietzesner, in the name of Rav Aharon Hagadol of Stolin, is addressing is that there's a word that's mentioned, that's used twice in this phrase from the Torah. So it repeats this language. It doubles the word for crying, tza'ok yitzhak, and so that it's not just regular crying. The way that this is often translated is surely shall cry out. It's an emphasis on this. We don't use this doubling of a word in English parlance, but it is common in biblical Hebrew, when there's an emphasis that's being made there. So what the Pietzessner says about this is to say how many thousands of times you have to cry out on every matter, meaning that one shouldn't think that if you truly cry out with your soul just once, then it's over. You're good to go. Every prayer, he says, needs to be repeated many times to reach the point where one is truly praying from the depth of one's heart. And to me, that really gets to what it is that we come to do when we're here together. In many ways, it's a repetition of our practice that allows us for presence in moments when we do feel the need to cry out, so that there can be a settling at the same time as while we are feeling that we're in distress. And so today, I wanted to approach this idea of there being so many different ways for us to cry out Jewishly. Of course, as the Pietzessner recognizes, we have prayer. This is one way of crying out to God. We also have shir, we have song and poetry. We have hitbodedut, which is crying out to God in solitude. And of course, we have nigun, which is a melody without words. So many different modalities in which we can cry out when we are experiencing distress. So today, with all of that in mind, I'll ask you to take a moment to settle the mind-body and to take a few breaths. And as you exhale, inviting a letting go, a surrender, a softening with each exhalation. Sometimes when we become aware of the breath, there's a tendency to focus on the breath to such an extent that we control the breath and may breathe differently than in our normal day-to-day activities. Today, see if it's possible to observe the breath without changing the normal way in which you would breathe. Just a noticing practice today. You don't have to breathe differently. Just notice the breath as it moves in and out of the body. And with each exhalation, inviting a sense of relaxation, of letting go into the mind-body. And as you continue to sit, noticing what's here, what's in this mind-body today, what needs attention, what is crying out to you. As we pay attention to that which is crying out to our heart, to our soul, to our mind, Invite the divine presence into this space. And repeating the prayer of your own heart, allowing for an outpouring, and knowing that the Holy One of Blessing is the container for the cries that pour forth from your own heart. Continue with that intention, sitting silently for 6 minutes. And I'll bring you out of the silence with the Nigun that we began with. Thank you for your presence.
Oh, thank you so much, Kerith, for the teaching, for the practice, for the melody, gathering us all in so beautifully. Friends, at this time, we have the opportunity for those who wish to recite Mourner's Kaddish. You can put names in the chat of those you're remembering today. If you are in the period of mourning, if you're marking a yahrzeit, the anniversary of a death, or if it's your practice to say Kaddish at this time, you're invited to unmute and to rise in body or in spirit. And the rest of the community, please join in responding in loving support. Yitkadal,
Yekdash, Meribah,
Amen.
Israel.
Amen.
Amen.
Hey, Salama Rabba, Maya,
Israel, Israel,
Shalom, Bimrama,
Shalom,
Israel,
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. The memories of our loved ones be a blessing to us. May all who are in grief be held in loving support. Amen.
Amen.
You're welcome to be seated if you are standing. If you're departing now, I send blessings to you. If you're able to stay, we have 15 minutes now with Kerith to share any reflections on your practice and experience, any questions. Folks, if you have a question, please write bold question in the chat so I can identify it and see it. And we have this opportunity to be in conversation. So I see from Pam, I'm so grateful for this meditation teaching and especially for the Nigun, which touched my heart. Kerith, are you able, oops, it's going too fast. Are you able to share how you get Zoom to transmit the bell? So that's a technical question. Yeah, you can answer a technical question. Why not? Did you select original audio for
I
musicians?
did.
If you can say that. Okay, that's helpful. So as people are thinking of questions, maybe I'll start, if I may. Well, I was thinking of the cry that you so movingly called us, invited us to drop into and draw up in ourselves. And I was noticing as I was practicing with it, it feels very different from there's I've participated in, and a lot of people have been in the oi conversation, like, I can't believe the injustices. Can you believe so and so did this and so did this? And the energy of complaining conversation feels very different from actually this sort of prayerful or mindful act of calling out. And I wonder if you can talk about what is that? How are those things different?
Thank you so much for that question.
And if you could speak a bit louder, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that question. I think it's really important. And as I was putting today's sit together, I was also thinking about our equanimity practice and how, in some senses, what I asked us to do today, you could think about this almost as an oppositional practice to that. So I want to address that a little bit as well. I'm seeing that people are not hearing me well, and I am speaking as loud as I can. So I'm moving a little closer to my microphone, and hopefully that's helpful. Um, so, um, so I think it's so important to be mindful about what is happening in the mind, body, spirit area, to pay close attention and to treat the self with kindness and compassion, for the cry. Uh, Almost, I think when I do this practice for myself, I like to think of the little girl Kerith, because it's easier sometimes for me to treat her with the kind of embrace that this practice, I think, calls for. So the complaining, I think, puts us in a space of papancha, where we start to just go in a circular motion, and that outward complaining, and the oi conversation that you addressed is not a productive space oftentimes. Sometimes the oi is necessary, and to share with a friend and to be received can be beautiful, but I think what you're talking is that spiraling piece that can happen. And that can also happen in an inward way as well. And this practice, I think, asks us to take this in a different direction, to know that there's a container for this. And in my mind, envisioning that container is God's presence. For me, when I envision that container and God's presence, I do envision this the Shekhinah as almost like a motherly figure, taking space for those complaints and responding compassionately. And I also want to just quickly address the oppositional place of this to our equanimity practice, and just to say that when we practice equanimity, we're not asked to pretend that suffering doesn't exist. And I think sometimes we lose that point. And it's important to notice the suffering that exists and then to be with it. And so that's the spirit that this practice was offered in today.
Thank you. There are two questions in the chat that I want to kind of bring together. Deborah asks, what is meant by crying out? And Harris asks, I'm thinking of the difference between calling out, calling on, and calling in, and how we can move away from calling out to calling on and calling in to create more community.
Beautiful. So let's start with Deborah's question first. The place that I think our text points us to is this idea of suffering, whether it be spiritual suffering, physical suffering, emotional suffering, and our human nature. I mean, even something as simple as I drop a heavy book on my toe and I say, ouch. So that's like the simplest, I think, form, this human nature to cry out when we experience pain. And then if we take this a step further for our existential pain that we feel just for being humans in this very broken world, to notice that that exists, not to push it away, not to pretend that it's not there, but to notice it and to give it its due space and, frankly, no more. And I think, Miriam, that's a bit about what you were getting to as well, right? And then let's turn to Harris's question, which I think is so beautiful. Thank you, Harris, for that. Yes, I think calling on, what a wonderful practice that is. And I think that that could be a next step for this practice when we sit to make space for and pay attention to what is our heart's desire, really focusing in on that, being able to name it and to take care of it for the self. Then perhaps moving toward an action of calling on others to be there. And as you say, to create community. I love the calling in, and especially, for me, I was talking about crying out, but sometimes this word of calling somebody out has a really negative connotation, like of causing someone embarrassment purposefully. And so I do love the idea of calling in rather than calling out, including. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I'm curious about God. And as you were saying, you gave us the beautiful image of Shekhinah, like receiving the cries and responding. And I maybe my first question is, if you can say more about what's the piece of actually inviting in the divine? What happens in you, or what does that look like for you? And what's your experience of response?
So for me, the idea of just, first of all, I was utilizing our text. So I'll start from a very basic place. And so when I worked on creating today's meditation, I was using our text as the guide. And so that cry in our text doesn't just go out to nowhere. It's a cry that's received by God's ears, if you will. And so when I thought about how could that work for me, it's almost a physical visualization of the cries be coming out and being something tangible, and needing a place to go so that they don't become the oi. And I often, when I sit, one of my visualizations is the shefa, the divine flow of energy, which for me is just an all-encompassing abundance. And so there's space for everything there. It's a container that is large enough for everything. It's a container that's large enough for the beautiful parts of me and for the ugly parts of me. And that there's space for all of it to exist and be embraced, with the care that, and this is my visualization, that a loving mother might receive, that sort of crying out from a child.
Oh, so beautiful. There's a question from Ricky. Feels to me like the word soek is to cry out in a way that is intended for others to hear. And doesn't the Torah always assume that those who hear it will respond?
So in this text, the crying out is specifically crying out to God. And in this text, it does say absolutely that God will indeed respond to our cries. And in the world that I inhabit, and I don't know about you, Ricky, but in my world that I inhabit, sometimes I feel like there's a response in terms of my heart's desire and my prayers. Sometimes not. We're taught that as history progressed for the Jewish people, unfortunately, there's hester panim, right? God's face becomes more hidden from us, and we are less connected to the divine. And so part of this crying out is just a practice to feel connected, to God. And whether or not I receive a response, is not really the goal for me with this practice. It's more the ability to know that I can feel connected. And that's really the response that in this practice that I'm looking for. And also to note that I'm not doing this by myself, that we're here together for a really important purpose, and that this is done in community. And being surrounded by our sitting community as we practice this very vulnerable practice, hopefully girds us a little, it gives us some strength.
It makes me so grateful for this gathering today in particular, and for this whole period of time that we get to come together again and again and again to feel less alone. It's so isolating when we're facing such big challenges. It also makes me think of ways that we can relate to that shefa that you're talking about, that not only is divinity sort of the witness to our cries, but divinity moves through us, through our cries, that the divine is crying with us. We have such beautiful images of God crying with the Israelites in exile, with being with us in the expression of our pain. And so that's resonating for me as well. I saw a comment from Cheryl that I want to share, and I'm curious how this lands with you. When I invite and allow myself to make sound and or move, dance my cry, my suffering is transformed into a deep prayer that sometimes a glimpse of clarity for moving through and a sense of calm and comfort. And you mentioned, Kerith, that we have these different modalities for crying. Can you speak to sound and nigun and movement?
Cheryl, thank you so, so much for that comment. It's so important. I think that we often in Jewish circles can run the risk of making this all about what goes on here. And IJS is so wonderful with helping us understand that Judaism is an embodied practice, and absolutely, when we are able to take the suffering of our hearts, of our souls, of our spirits, and to transform them into I love this idea of movement, dance, and sound is what really resonates for me, obviously, as a cantor. But this idea of transformation, and I think that that happens somatically in the body, that we're allowing the buildup of the tension that a suppressed cry creates within our bodies to release and to feel that sense of relief when we don't force it to remain blocked. I think we can all think of times when we've been in a situation where we feel like it's not appropriate. We feel like we need to cry, but it's not appropriate for us to cry. And that feeling of holding that down. And so that the opposite of that is allowing that to move forth and literally allowing for it to move through the space, whether it's through the vocal cords or through the body, to allow the stress and probably the cortisol that's running through our body to move freely and to move on instead of grasping and holding on to it. And so that's where there's this weird, I think, connection between this crying out and the equanimity, because unless we recognize it, let it move through and let it go. For me, I don't know how we practice equanimity without recognizing this piece of it. But thank you so much, Cheryl, for that.
Thank you. We're at time. So I want to again thank you, Kerith, so much for leading us in teaching and in practice. Thank you again to Natalie for holding the text side of today's sit. And again, such gratitude to Jill Perlman for sponsoring today's sit in memory and honor of your mother, Doris. May her memory be a blessing to you. And everyone, may you all be held in these challenging times. And may we continue to practice this crying out so that it doesn't get lodged, so that we have energy and availability to do what is ours to offer and do at this time. Many blessings to you.